Autumn arrived at Blackthorne Manor wrapped in silver mist and fading gold. The great estate stood upon a gentle rise overlooking rolling fields and ancient oak trees, whose leaves had begun their slow surrender to the season. Once, laughter had echoed through these halls. Once, carriage wheels had rattled along the stone drive carrying guests eager to bask in the splendor of the Ashcroft name. Now silence ruled the manor like an old king reluctant to leave his throne. Duchess Eleanor Ashcroft stood beside the tall window of the morning room and watched the fog drift across the gardens. At 47, she remained a striking woman. Her dark hair, threaded with elegant strands of silver, was arranged with the same care it had always been. Her posture remained perfectly straight. Her gowns were chosen with impeccable taste. Yet there was something absent from her reflection these days. Something that no servant, tailor, or jeweler could restore. Joy. The years had taken much from her. First her beloved son, then her husband, and finally the future she had once imagined for herself. Most people believed grief eventually softened. Eleanor knew better. It merely changed shape. It settled quietly inside a person and became part of them, like an old scar hidden beneath fine clothing. A knock sounded upon the door. "Your Grace," the butler said carefully. "The solicitors have arrived." Eleanor frowned. "At this hour? They insist the matter is urgent." A chill touched her spine. She nodded. "Show them in." Minutes later, 3 gentlemen entered the library carrying leather cases filled with documents. Their expressions were grave enough to darken the room before a single word had been spoken. Eleanor remained standing behind her desk. "Please explain why I have been summoned to my own library before breakfast." The eldest solicitor cleared his throat. "Your Grace, what we are about to discuss concerns the financial condition of the estate." She felt immediate irritation. "The estate is managed properly." A brief silence followed. Then the man spoke words that altered everything. "I am afraid it is not." The next hour unfolded like a nightmare from which she could not awaken. Her late husband, Duke Arthur Ashcroft, had accumulated enormous debts during the final years of his life. Investments had failed. Loans had been hidden. Properties had been used as collateral without her knowledge. Eleanor listened in stunned silence. No, it could not be true. Arthur had never mentioned any of this. Not once. The solicitor placed papers before her. Official records, bank statements, contract. Every signature belonged to her husband. Every debt was real. By the time the explanations ended, Eleanor felt as though the ground beneath Blackthorne Manor had vanished entirely. "How much?" she asked quietly. The room fell silent. The answer came at last. "Enough to lose everything." Her hand tightened around the edge of the desk. Everything. The manor. The lands. The family name. The servants who had spent their lives here. All of it. Gone. The solicitor continued speaking, but his voice seemed distant. "The creditors are preparing legal action. Unless immediate payment is secured, Blackthorne Manor will be seized within the month." Within the month. The words echoed endlessly. After the men departed, Eleanor remained alone in the library. Sunlight slowly crossed the floor. Hours passed. She barely noticed. At last she rose and walked through the house. Every room carried memories. The grand staircase where her son had once raced down 2 steps at a time. The music room where Arthur had proposed to her decades earlier. The gardens where she had spent endless summer afternoons teaching her child to ride. Every corner of Blackthorne Manor contained pieces of the people she had lost. Soon strangers would own it. Strangers would walk through these halls and never understand what they were taking. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt truly afraid. 3 days later another visitor arrived. This time the butler appeared visibly unsettled. "There is a gentleman requesting a private audience." Eleanor sighed. "Another creditor?" "No, Your Grace." "Then who?" The butler hesitated. "Lord Julian Ravenshire." Eleanor froze. The name alone awakened memories she had not touched in years. Julian. Her son's closest friend. The boy who had spent half his childhood roaming these grounds. The young man who had followed her son into every adventure imaginable. She had not seen him in nearly 5 years. What does he want? He would not say. Eleanor gathered herself. Send him in. The library door opened. A man entered. For a moment she scarcely recognized him. The awkward youth she remembered was gone. In his place stood a powerful gentleman whose presence seemed to fill the room effortlessly. Tall, confident, impeccably dressed, the years had sharpened every feature. Success rested upon him as naturally as sunlight. Yet his eyes remained familiar. The same steady eyes she remembered from long ago. He bowed respectfully. Your Grace. Eleanor nodded. Lord Ravenshire. His gaze lingered briefly upon her face. Something unreadable passed through his expression. Then it vanished. I understand you've received unfortunate news. She stiffened. So the kingdom knows already. No. His voice remained calm. Only a handful of people. Then how do you know? Because I purchased the debts. Silence exploded across the room. Eleanor stared. I beg your pardon? I purchased every debt attached to Blackthorne Manor. She felt certain she had misunderstood. Why? Julian met her gaze directly. Because I refuse to watch this house disappear. The words unsettled her more than they should have. That is not your responsibility. No, he agreed quietly. But I chose it anyway. Eleanor moved toward the window. What exactly are you proposing? Julian reached into his coat and placed several documents upon the desk. The debts are settled. Her breath caught. What? The estate is safe. She stared at him. Nothing made sense. No one spends a fortune rescuing a dying estate without reason. A long silence followed. Then Julian answered. There is one condition. Of course. There always was. Eleanor slowly turned. What condition? For the first time, something vulnerable appeared behind his composed expression. Small, brief, almost invisible. Then he spoke. You remain at Blackthorne Manor. She frowned. As a guest. His eyes never left hers. No. The room seemed to stop breathing. As my wife. The word struck like thunder. Eleanor simply stared at him. Unable to speak. Unable to move. Unable to understand how the boy she once watched running through these halls had just changed her life forever. The wedding took place quietly. No orchestra played beneath crystal chandeliers. No long procession of nobles arrived in glittering carriages. No society pages celebrated the union. Blackthorne Manor simply opened its chapel one gray morning, and before a handful of witnesses, Duchess Eleanor Ashcroft became Lady Ravenshire. The title felt foreign, wrong, like a gown tailored for someone else. When the ceremony ended, the vicar offered his blessings, the witnesses dispersed, and life continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything had changed. The kingdom learned of the marriage within days. Whispers spread from London drawing rooms to countryside estates. A powerful young lord marrying a woman nearly 20 years older than himself was scandal enough. The fact that she had once been his closest friend's mother made the gossip irresistible. At afternoon teas, ladies lowered their voices behind lace fans. At gentlemen's clubs, men exchanged amused smiles over glasses of brandy. Most assumed Julian Ravenshire had lost his senses. Others assumed the Duchess had manipulated him. Neither explanation was true. Blackthorne Manor became a place people discussed endlessly but rarely understood. Inside the estate itself, life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Eleanor made certain of it. From the beginning, she established boundaries so clear that even the servants could see them. They occupied separate wings. They dined together only when necessary. Their conversations remained polite, brief, and carefully controlled. Every interaction felt like a negotiation. Julian never complained. That almost irritated her more. One evening, while reviewing estate accounts in the library, Eleanor looked up to find him standing in the doorway. You are still working? It is none of your concern. A faint smile touched his lips. You skipped supper. I was not hungry. You haven't eaten since breakfast. She frowned. Are you monitoring my meals now? No. His expression remained calm. The kitchen staff is concerned. The kitchen staff concerns itself too much. Julian approached the desk and placed a covered plate beside her papers. Fresh bread. Roasted vegetables. Her favorite lemon tart. Without another word, he turned and left. Eleanor stared after him. The food remained untouched for several minutes. Then she reluctantly took a bite. It was still warm. She hated that she noticed. Weeks passed. Then months. Winter began creeping across the countryside. And despite her determination, Eleanor found herself noticing more things. Small things. Dangerous things. Julian never raised his voice. Not once. When she challenged him, he listened. When she dismissed him, he remained respectful. When society insulted her, he became quietly ruthless. At a Christmas gathering hosted by neighboring nobility, Eleanor overheard two women discussing her marriage. Neither realized she stood nearby. Poor Lord Ravenshire. I cannot imagine what possessed him. Perhaps he simply felt obligated. Or lonely. The women laughed softly. Eleanor continued walking without reacting. She had endured worse. But later that evening, she noticed both women's husbands suddenly losing several lucrative business opportunities connected to Ravenshire enterprises. No explanation was offered. No public confrontation occurred. The message arrived all the same. Julian had heard. And Julian had acted. The realization unsettled her. One snowy afternoon, she found fresh white roses arranged in a crystal vase within the morning room. She frowned immediately. White roses had always been her favorite. Only 3 people had known that. Her late husband, her son, and herself. She summoned a maid. Who placed these here? The young woman smiled. Lord Ravenshire sent them. Eleanor stared at the flowers. Did he say why? No, Your Grace. Of course not. He never explained anything. The roses appeared again the following week. And the week after that. Always fresh. Always white. Always arriving without comment. By February, Eleanor had stopped asking questions. The servants noticed more than either of them realized. In kitchens and hallways, conversations quietly unfolded. They observed Lord Ravenshire carrying heavy ledgers before Eleanor could attempt it herself. They noticed him ensuring fireplaces were lit in rooms she preferred before she arrived. They saw him cancel meetings whenever she became unwell. Most importantly, they noticed he never demanded gratitude. Not once. One stormy evening, the entire estate lost power after fierce winds damaged nearby lines. Darkness swallowed the manor. Rain hammered against the windows. Thunder rolled endlessly across the hills. Eleanor sat alone in the library reading by candlelight when a sudden crash echoed outside. She startled violently. The old oak near the west wing had fallen. Moments later, the library door opened. Julian entered carrying another candle. The storm is worsening. I noticed. He glanced toward the windows. The west wing isn't safe tonight. I've survived storms before. I know. His tone remained patient. But the roof sustained damage. Eleanor closed her book. And your solution? The guest chambers near my wing are intact. Silence followed. Then realization. Her eyes narrowed. I will not share a room with you. To her annoyance, he laughed. Actually laughed. No one suggested that. She felt heat rise into her cheeks. Good. His smile lingered. 2 separate rooms. 1 hallway. Eleanor stood. Very well. The arrangement lasted only 1 night. Yet something shifted. Perhaps because the storm felt strangely intimate. Perhaps because grief often grows louder during darkness. Or perhaps because neither of them could hide behind routine. Near midnight, Eleanor awoke feeling ill. A fever burned through her body. Her head throbbed. The room spun whenever she tried to stand. Hours passed. By dawn, she barely possessed the strength to leave the bed. When the physician finally arrived later that morning, he seemed unsurprised. Nothing serious. He examined her carefully. Exhaustion. Fever. She requires rest. Julian remained beside the bed throughout the examination. Only after the physician departed did Eleanor look toward him. You may go. No. The answer came immediately. I am perfectly capable of resting alone. You are. He adjusted a blanket near her shoulder. And yet I am staying. Eleanor prepared another argument, then stopped. Something in his expression silenced her. Concern. Pure and uncomplicated. Not obligation. Not pity. Concern. The kind that cannot be performed. She eventually drifted back to sleep. When she woke again hours later, sunlight filled the room. Julian sat in a nearby chair, reading. Still there. For a moment, Eleanor simply watched him. His dark hair fell slightly across his forehead. One hand rested against the armrest. He looked tired, as though he had not slept, as though he had remained there the entire day. Something unfamiliar tightened within her chest. Not fear. Not guilt. Something far more dangerous. Comfort. Julian sensed movement and looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. For several seconds, the room remained perfectly silent. Then he closed his book. How are you feeling? Better. Relief immediately softened his features. A tiny change. Most people would have missed it. Eleanor did not. For reasons she could not explain, that troubled her deeply. The following morning, they shared breakfast. The dining room glowed with pale winter sunlight. Steam rose from freshly poured tea. Outside, snow covered the gardens. Inside, silence stretched comfortably between them. Not awkward. Not forced. Comfortable. Eleanor reached for her teacup. At the same moment, Julian glanced toward her. Their eyes met again. This time neither looked away immediately. Something invisible passed between them. A quiet understanding. A fragile shift neither dared name. Then the moment ended. The conversation resumed. The servants continued working. The day moved forward. Yet Eleanor knew something had changed. And judging by the thoughtful look lingering in Julian's eyes, he knew it too. Neither of them spoke of it. But for the first time since signing the marriage contract, the wall she had built around her heart no longer felt entirely secure. Spring arrived at Blackthorne Manor like a gentle promise. The snow vanished from the gardens. Roses awakened beneath the warming sun. Windows stood open once more, allowing fresh air to drift through hallways that had known only winter silence. Something else had changed as well. The house no longer felt haunted. For years, grief had lingered in every room, settling over furniture and memories alike. Yet now laughter occasionally appeared where sorrow once ruled. Conversations lasted longer. Meals no longer felt like obligations, and despite all her efforts to resist it, Eleanor knew why. Julian. His presence had become woven into the rhythm of her days. Morning tea somehow appeared exactly the way she preferred it. Books she mentioned casually during conversation appeared in the library days later. The gardens bloomed with flowers she had once admired in passing. He never announced these gestures. He simply remembered. That was what frightened her most. One afternoon, Eleanor stood beside the fountain in the western gardens, reading correspondence from London when she heard voices approaching. 2 young noblewomen were visiting neighboring estates and had been invited for luncheon. Their laughter carried across the path. Eleanor glanced up. The women had stopped several yards away, and both were staring at Julian. One adjusted her gloves. The other smiled a little too brightly. Eleanor immediately recognized the expression. Interest. The younger woman stepped closer. Lord Ravenshire, everyone says your new railway project is extraordinary. Julian nodded politely. You are kind to say so. The conversation continued. Harmless. Perfectly respectable. Yet something unpleasant twisted inside Eleanor's chest. She disliked it immediately. The feeling was irrational. Embarrassing. And entirely inappropriate. She turned away before either woman could notice. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet irritation. By evening she was annoyed with herself. Jealousy belonged to young women. Not widows approaching 50. Certainly not duchesses who had spent years mastering self-control. Yet the feeling remained. Days later she discovered something even more troubling. She missed him. Julian had traveled to London for business. Only 3 days. Yet the manor felt strangely empty. Breakfast was quieter. The library felt larger. Even the gardens seemed less colorful. When his carriage finally returned, Eleanor happened to be standing near the front entrance. Pure coincidence. At least that was what she told herself. Julian stepped from the carriage and immediately spotted her. A smile appeared. Warm. Unforced. Unexpectedly pleased. For reasons she could not explain, her entire day improved. That realization alone nearly sent her back inside. Weeks passed. Then one rainy afternoon everything changed. Eleanor had been searching for estate records when she entered an unused gallery wing near the eastern side of the manor. The room had remained locked for months. She frowned. The door stood slightly open. Curiosity overcame caution. She stepped inside. The scent of oil paint lingered in the air. Large canvases leaned against walls. Brushes rested upon tables. Then she saw it. A massive portrait covered by a linen cloth. Confusion swept through her. The room clearly belonged to an artist. But why? She approached slowly. Something about the painting felt familiar. Without thinking, she grasped the edge of the cloth. And pulled. The fabric fell. Eleanor froze. The world seemed to stop. The portrait towered above her. And it was her. Not merely a likeness. Not merely a painting. Her. Yet not the woman she expected to see. The Eleanor staring back from the canvas possessed strength that seemed almost regal. Her silver-threaded hair glowed beneath golden light. Her posture radiated authority. Her eyes held wisdom, resilience, and quiet courage. There was sadness there too. But it did not diminish her. It made her beautiful. More beautiful than she had imagined possible. The painter had somehow captured the woman hidden beneath years of grief. The woman Eleanor herself had forgotten existed. Her throat tightened. She stared for what felt like an eternity. Then anger arrived. Sudden. Sharp. Protective. Who had commissioned this? Who had given someone permission to observe her so closely? The answer appeared before she even asked the question. Julian. Only Julian. Fury carried her from the gallery. She found him in the library reviewing documents. The moment she entered, he looked up. And immediately understood. You found it. The calmness of his voice only deepened her frustration. How dare you? He closed the ledger quietly. Eleanor. No. Her voice echoed through the room. You had no right. For the first time in months genuine anger flashed across her face. I am not some curiosity to be studied. I know. You hired a painter to watch me. To paint you. Without asking. A long silence followed. Julian rose slowly. I would have asked. Then why didn't you? His answer came immediately. Because you would have refused. The truth of it struck hard. She hated that he was right. For several moments neither spoke. Then Julian moved toward the doorway. Come with me. I have no interest in. Please. The single word stopped her. Reluctantly she followed. Minutes later they stood before the portrait once more. Even now Eleanor struggled to look away from it. Julian remained beside her. Quiet. Patient. Waiting. Finally she spoke. This isn't me. The words emerged almost as a whisper. They painted someone else. Julian looked at the portrait. Then at her. No. Eleanor shook her head. That woman is confident. His gaze softened. She is. She is beautiful. Very. She isn't broken. Julian turned toward her completely. Something profound lived within his eyes. Something she suddenly realized had been there all along. Then he spoke. softly. "It's the only version of you I've ever seen." The room fell silent. Eleanor felt her breath catch. For one impossible moment the years disappeared. The widow vanished. The title vanished. The grief vanished. All that remained was a woman standing beside a man who saw her more clearly than she saw herself. And that realization frightened her far more than any scandal ever could. Because for the first time she wanted to believe him. Summer arrived with bright skies and blooming gardens, but peace abandoned Blackthorne Manor. The portrait had changed everything. Not openly. Not immediately. Yet something delicate and dangerous now existed between Eleanor and Julian. Every glance lingered a little longer. Every conversation carried meanings neither dared speak aloud. The distance she had fought so hard to maintain no longer felt natural. And society noticed. It always did. The whispers grew louder. At first they remained confined to drawing rooms and private dinners. Then they spread through London like wildfire. A young lord with limitless wealth. An older duchess clinging to her position. People invented stories faster than truth could follow. Eleanor pretended none of it mattered. But she heard everything. Every cruel joke. Every mocking remark. Every suggestion that Julian deserved better. One evening they attended a royal reception hosted by one of the kingdom's most influential families. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the enormous ballroom. Music drifted through the air. Noblemen and ladies moved gracefully across polished marble floors. Eleanor felt every eye upon her. She remained composed. She always did. Then Lady Sophia Whitmore arrived. The entire room seemed to notice. Sophia was 24. Beautiful. Elegant. Everything society considered perfect. Golden hair. Youthful laughter. A future filled with possibilities. Eleanor watched as guests immediately began steering Sophia toward Julian. The match was obvious. Predictable. Appropriate. Several noblewomen smiled approvingly. Several gentlemen nodded their agreement. Even Julian's business associates seemed pleased. Eleanor felt something inside her quietly break. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Simply a small fracture deep within her heart. Sophia approached Julian during supper. The young woman was charming and intelligent. Julian treated her courteously. Nothing more. Yet Eleanor found herself unable to remain at the table. She excused herself and stepped onto a moonlit terrace overlooking the gardens. For several minutes she stood alone, trying to regain control, trying to remember who she was. A widow, a duchess, a woman old enough to know better. Not some foolish girl wounded by jealousy. The realization settled heavily upon her. Perhaps society was right. Perhaps she had been selfish. Perhaps Julian deserved someone capable of giving him everything she could not. Children. Youth. Decades of future happiness. The thought haunted her long after the reception ended. The following weeks only made matters worse. Pressure surrounded Julian from every direction. Advisors recommended Sophia constantly. Family friends praised the match. Business partners encouraged it openly. Even newspapers began mentioning their names together. Julian ignored the discussions. Eleanor did not. She listened carefully. And each conversation convinced her further that she was standing in the way of his future. Then fate delivered the final blow. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Eleanor was organizing estate documents in Julian's study while he attended meetings in town. She worked quietly until a leather journal slipped from a crowded shelf. It struck the floor. Several pages fell open. Eleanor immediately bent to return it. Then her eyes caught a familiar name. Her own. She froze. A gentleman's journal was private. She knew that. She intended to close it immediately. Instead her gaze drifted across the page. Just one line. Only one. Written in younger handwriting. Dated nearly 9 years earlier. She read it once. Then again. Then a third time. She laughed at dinner tonight and I understood, for the first time, what it means to want to protect someone forever. Her hands trembled. The date stole her breath. Julian had been 19. 19. Eleanor lowered herself slowly into a chair. Unable to move. Unable to think. After several minutes she opened the journal again. Another entry. Then another. Then another. Years stretched across the pages. Years of quiet devotion. Years of admiration. Years of patience. Never expectation. Never entitlement. Simply love. Steady. Faithful. Endless. One entry described watching her comfort a frightened servant after her son's death. Another recalled seeing her standing alone in the chapel long after everyone else had gone home. One page contained nothing except a single sentence. I wish someone remembered to care for her the way she cares for everyone else. Tears blurred the words. Eleanor closed the journal, then pressed it against her chest. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too full of truths she had never allowed herself to see. Julian had not fallen in love because of the marriage. The marriage had happened because he was already in love. For years, perhaps forever. That realization should have brought happiness. Instead it brought heartbreak, because now she understood exactly how much he had sacrificed, and because she loved him, she could finally admit it, not to anyone else, not aloud, but to herself. She loved him, which meant she had to let him go. The decision shattered her. Yet once made, she never wavered. The following days became an exercise in silent suffering. She arranged meetings between Julian and Sophia. She encouraged conversations. She withdrew whenever possible. Most importantly, she instructed lawyers to prepare documents ending their arrangement. If Julian wished to marry properly, nothing would stand in his way. Not even her. Especially not her. The papers were signed 3 weeks later. Eleanor stared at her signature for a long time. One stroke of ink. One farewell. One broken heart. That evening she began packing. The process took hours. Every room contained memories. Every hallway reminded her of moments she wished she could keep forever. Near midnight she wandered through the silent manor one final time. Eventually she reached the grand hall. The portrait hung exactly where Julian had placed it, bathed in soft golden light. The woman in the painting looked strong, loved, seen. Eleanor reached out and touched the frame gently. A tear slipped down her cheek. Tomorrow she would leave Blackthorne Manor. Tomorrow she would disappear from Julian's life. Tomorrow she would give him the future she believed he deserved, even if it destroyed her. Then she whispered a quiet goodbye to the portrait and turned away, never noticing the figure standing unseen in the shadows at the far end of the hall. Julian had found the signed papers, and he now knew exactly what she intended to do. Blackthorne Manor slept beneath a sky of silver and velvet. Moonlight spilled across the gardens, painting the winding paths in pale light. The summer roses swayed gently in the night breeze, filling the air with their fragrance. Everything appeared peaceful. Eleanor Ashcroft felt anything but peaceful. Tomorrow she would leave. By this time the following evening, she would be miles away from Blackthorne Manor, carrying only memories and a heart she had broken with her own hands. Sleep refused to come. So she walked, alone, as she had done so many times during the loneliest years of her life. Her feet carried her toward the old oak tree near the western garden. The same tree beneath which her son had once played as a child. The same tree where she had sat countless evenings after his death, wondering how a mother was supposed to continue living after losing part of her soul. She stopped beneath its branches. The night was quiet. Then footsteps approached. She knew who it was before she turned. Julian. He emerged from the shadows, his dark coat stirring softly in the breeze. Moonlight touched his face, revealing an expression she had never seen before. Pain. Not anger. Not disappointment. Pain. For a moment neither spoke. The silence stretched between them. Finally Eleanor managed a faint smile. I suppose you've found the papers. I have. His voice was calm. Too calm. Eleanor looked away. Then there's nothing left to explain. There is everything left to explain. The words struck harder than they should have. She drew a slow breath. This is the right thing. For whom? For you. Julian stepped closer. No. Her composure began slipping. You deserve a future. I already chose my future. You deserve children. I never asked for children. You deserve a wife your own age. His eyes never left hers. I never wanted a wife my own age. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. This was exactly why she had tried to leave quietly. Because hearing him say such things made leaving impossible. And staying felt selfish. I love you. The words escaped before she could stop them. The confession hung between them. Raw. Honest. Terrifying. Julian's breath caught. For years she had hidden those words. Now they stood exposed beneath the stars. A tear slipped down her cheek. I love you enough to let you go. His jaw tightened. Eleanor. No. She shook her head. You deserve every happiness this world can offer. You are my happiness. The answer came instantly. Without hesitation. Without doubt. Her heart shattered completely. Because she believed him. That was the problem. She believed every word. She laughed softly through tears. A broken sound. Then she spoke the sentence she had rehearsed 100 times. The sentence she thought would save him. You're too young for an old duchess. The night grew still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Julian looked at her for several seconds. Then he began walking toward her. Slowly. Deliberately. As though approaching something precious. Something fragile. Something he had waited years to touch. Eleanor could not move. Could not breathe. Could not look away. When he finally reached her, he lifted both hands and gently cupped her face. The gesture was so tender it nearly undid her instantly. No one had touched her like that in years. Not the Duchess. Not the widow. Simply Eleanor. His thumbs brushed away her tears. His forehead rested lightly against hers. And then he whispered, so softly that only the night could hear. To me, you're perfect. The world disappeared. The title disappeared. The years disappeared. The fears disappeared. Only those words remained. To me, you're perfect. The wall she had spent years building finally collapsed. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It simply gave way. And for the first time since losing her son, since losing her husband, since losing herself, she stopped trying to be strong. A sob escaped her. Then another. Julian wrapped his arms around her immediately, holding her tightly, safely, as though he had been waiting years to do exactly this. Eleanor buried her face against his chest and cried. Not from sadness. Not entirely. But from relief. Relief that someone finally saw the woman beneath the title. Relief that someone loved her despite every reason society claimed he should not. Relief that she no longer had to carry everything alone. Above them, the branches of the old oak tree stirred gently in the summer breeze. And for the first time in many years, Eleanor felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. Months later, visitors entering Blackthorne Manor always paused in the grand hall. There, above the sweeping staircase, hung the famous portrait. The portrait of Duchess Eleanor Ravenshire. Strong. Beautiful. Alive. A woman loved exactly as she was. Julian never moved it. Never replaced it. Never allowed anyone to diminish it. Because every time he passed beneath that portrait, he remembered the truth he had known all along. The world saw an aging duchess. He saw perfection. And now, at last, she did too.